Ah, bollocks!
Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of What the Trans.
What the Trans? No, can't be. Can't be trusted to do a fancy musical theatre style harmony. We'll do it one day.
Too early in the morning.
Too early in the morning. Far too early in the morning.
It is too early in the morning. We're up in the AM. That's already a sign.
Unprecedented.
Wait a second! What time is it?
10:30.
10:30? 10:30? I've never been up at 10:30. What happens?
And if we, get our skates on and don't witter on too much, we might even be done by lunchtime. That's how early it is.
Whoopee!
Yep.
So I've got like a film I'm watching at around 3 and I've got to head off to London for it 'cause it's one of the big IMAXs as well, so...
If we aren't done by 3:00, then I think we need to have a word with ourselves.
Oh, yes.
It is currently 10:41. I pray for if nothing, if not more, our editors, that we are done before 12.
Can you imagine? They'd quite justifiably resign in protest if you turned in...
Fucking valid unionization at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Here you go. Here's 5 hours of audio. What? So how are we both?
Been up and down. This week has been a rough one. The current disability changes have been fucking horrific, and me and my friends have been scrabbling around really trying to figure out A, what that means, B, what it means for us, C, us as in our each different places within sort of the space of disability. And yeah, it's been a scary, not fun, stressful time. Like, as if we didn't have enough battles to fucking fight already. Adding in another one. So that's great. Wonderful. Cheers. Thanks, Gov. Fuck you. Fuck you so much.
Oh, yeah, fuck you very much. It's honestly something similar for me. Obviously, I'm a wheelchair user, and I'm worried that they will look at the podcast and say, well, you're perfectly capable of doing something, so you have to get a job. I'm desperately concerned because working at this pace and getting something out once every 2 weeks is about the limit of what I can manage, really, because each podcast episode, despite what you might think, does take some effort to put together, and all the writing and organizing and stuff. We all do that, but my part in that is kind of as much as I can manage, because it is pretty tiring to do, to just spend a day bashing out the script on a keyboard.
And all the studying and all the researching as well. And also trying to chase sources as well, because if you want a nice meat, managing all that, it's a freaking mess.
It's awful.
I don't know how I manage it 7 days.
Well, it's not awful. It can be awfully taxing when it's happening really quickly. The reason why I am able to be here and have been here so kind of consistently is because of how flexible you can be with it. If I need a day off, that's not pay that's lost. That's not, we don't have to commute every single day to do 8 hours. There is so much flexibility within how much we're able to do. I mean, not everything is super flexible. Obviously we have set recording days and things like that, but there's enough maneuverability that this is the closest to a continual working job I've had, because every time I'd gotten a job, until I went on long-term sick, my back would go out on me. I'd have a big disc slip, and I would get incredibly burnt out and overwhelmed because autism, ADHD, and then on top of that, I'd need months of recovery, which means I'd have to then give up the job. They can try and weaponize it, but it is scary that they may try and weaponize it, and that is something that is not lost on me either, because there is so much to the ways in which any and every part of your life that is not pain and suffering is weaponized against you as a disabled person when you're in these situations like PIP, like limited capability for work. I think that there's this kind of thing of where, like, if you're seen as having too happy of a time, that seems to be a problem. Instead of it being recognized as, you're getting the opportunity to live a life that is fulfilling, and that is something that people deserve regardless of what their fucking contribution to capitalism is recognized as, which, by the way, we also fucking do, because like, disabled people get taxed so hard, like, informally, through the fact that accessibility is considered luxury as far as the market is concerned. And, you know, the amount of times that means that you're paying for, you know, more taxis than the average, or you're having to buy furniture that has specifications in it and accessibility put into it. And, you know, so many of these things, even like dietary requirements, can be a whole thing. It means that you can end up having to buy food that's labeled as health food at a premium, instead of being able to get like the 60p loaves of bread. It's just that, on top of being given less for it, on top of then having a sense of suspicion placed upon you for daring to then enjoy life outside of that.
Yes.
I've had a lot of feelings. I've had a lot of feelings about all this.
Yeah, so I'm honestly a bit lost for words that a Labour government would consider this. And obviously something else that's been mentioned that they might do is kind of pushing young people to, you know, go into the armed forces as a way of tackling unemployment. That's something else that's been brought up. So disability cuts and national service by the back door. Isn't it great that we voted for Labour, who are almost indistinguishable from the Tories we were so delighted to get rid of? But let's talk about resistance to it, right? Because there's a group called Crips Against Cuts. There's also Disabled People Against the Cuts, who've existed for a long time. Both those organisations have planned quite a lot of protests. I've just got the Crips Against Cuts planned actions on the screen in front of me now. And it would, honestly, it's everywhere. It's happening everywhere. It's Manchester, Liverpool, Birmingham, Coventry, Bristol, Bournemouth, Exeter, Truro, Portsmouth, Brighton, London, Sheffield, Leeds, Darlington, Newcastle and Edinburgh. So there might be one near you, and by the time this episode goes out, there may even be more planned. So, you know, fight back, raise your voice, go to a protest.
Yep, even if you're not disabled, please turn up, listen, engage. Do not consider this to be, you know, in the same way, it's likely that the people listening to this are trans, right? Like, that's a 99.9% probability. You're going to understand the need for people who are not immediately within your community to still stand up and be vocal on issues. And so if you haven't engaged in much activism for disability rights, for disability justice, then please do so. Like, get involved. It's very much a similar kind of thing of, like, we need more than just us to be vocal on this, but we do need the people who aren't, you know, directly impacted by this to also recognize that they're there to support, and they're there to help further share our voice, further share our needs for decent, livable human standards. And yeah, don't let the fear shrink you and remove you from the ability to engage and fight back. That's what they want. They want us to sit down, shut up, and take it. And if you think I fucking will, you've got another thing coming.
And in fact, just basically, I'm looking at the page for the planned action for Manchester, and it's today. So once we finish recording, I've got to get somewhere for 3 o'clock as well.
Fucking rights on. Brilliant.
Damn right. So, since two of us have plans...
Yeah, Alex, how are you doing?
Yeah, how are you, darling?
I'm doing well. I mean, I could complain about Labour tax as well, but that's because I'm buying a new home and stamp duty's an arsehole, but that's a whole other story whatsoever. But I've been chilling. I've been watching way too many home decoration videos for what's healthy, I reckon.
Have you been playing House Flipper in preparation?
I probably should, to be honest.
Yeah.
I've been sort of trying to play some Borderlands with my co-workers recently, so that's my extent of gaming at the moment. Because I've never really played it before, and everyone says, "Oh, you should play it. It's such a good game." And
yeah, I've meant to get around to that one because I've had people not just recommend it to me, but also be like, "No, you in particular would like this character in this thing." So I've meant to get around to it, but recently I've actually been mainly playing the Dark Pictures anthology. I've completed Man of Medan. I'm now on Little Hope, and I've also started playing House of Ashes because I don't know when to stop. And then I've been playing Coffee Talk, which Coffee Talk 2, I'm not gonna go on a rant about how much I love that game. I love Coffee Talk. It's such a beautiful, sweet, unique little game, and it makes my heart happy.
Indeed, you've been doing some Avowed recently, haven't you, Ash?
I have indeed. Yeah, good fun. Just a good solid game. It's got good combat mechanics. There's several different ways of going about it. It's an Obsidian game, so there's lots of different ways of resolving any given quest. You don't have to go in and do a violence. You can usually talk people down or whatever. It's great. It's just, good solid RPG. It's not going to set the world on fire, but it doesn't need to. It's just a good game where you'll play it and then maybe a couple of years later you'll remember, oh yeah, Avowed, I enjoyed that, and you'll go back to it. It's that sort of game, I think. And it reminded me of the Outer Worlds, not the Outer Wilds, in a good way. And I mean, again, Obsidian, who made Fallout New Vegas, which is the transiest game that ever transed.
Yes.
So
hell yeah.
It's one of Owen's favorite games, and I'll often be like, yes, Egg, of course.
At this point in the recording, there was some weird little technical glitch that happened. I don't really know, but Flint's microphone then switched to a different one, so that's why Flint is going to sound different for the rest of the episode. Okay.
Since two of us have plans this very afternoon happening at 3:00, let's crack on, shall we?
Oh, indeed, and we might as well jump to action alley, but this one's not an action that is going to take place, but an action that has taken place and has really blown us away, because this week, What the Trans joined forces with the trans journalists over at Assigned Media, and together we put together a fundraiser for improving our respective websites. We spent months going back and forth with Assigned Media, talking about our needs for the site and getting quotes, then discussing how we'd word the fundraiser, what the image would look like. But eventually, once we had all of that sorted out, we launched the fundraiser and settled in for the long haul, which was a bit preemptive because we reached that target amount in a little under 90 minutes, which is terrific. And
yeah,
absolutely.
It is so gobsmacking. I couldn't comprehend. It is to get I don't know. It was crazy. The idea that you could just put on a feature-length film and it was already funded by the time that was over. That is. Yeah. I just thank you. Oh my God, thank you. That's beyond what kind of support we ever thought we were going to get. We all thought this was going to be a much longer haul.
Yes.
And instead it was like, wait, really? Already? Oh, and another milestone? Really? Already? Oh my God. And I don't know, that's very cool.
And when we went to close the fundraiser before we went over the 2,500 mark, people were just donating so quickly that we couldn't even close it in time before people kept chucking money at us. And it's like, no, stop, we got what we want.
We got what we needed. And, any extra, there's not like there's stretch goals on a Kickstarter or something. It's like, we've got the amount we needed. That's it. But I mean, as Flint has already said, if you were part of that, if you donated or even if you just shared it, thank you. Thank you so much. That was amazing, wasn't it? Just,
absolutely mind-blowing.
So we'll keep you posted on updates to the site as we make them happen. We're hoping to make the website more accessible, a bit easier to use, and, a few other things like that. We're hoping to have the option to enable dark mode on there and a few other little quality of life improvements. But as I said, we'll let you know how it all goes. And again, if you're one of the people that chipped in for this, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Moving on from that awesomeness.
Yes.
So, there is a new trans-led research study into regional equalities when accessing trans healthcare in England. It's a relatively short survey. It estimates that it'll take 15 to 30 minutes to complete, and the survey will be available until the 6th of April 2025. So more information and the survey itself are available on its website, which we will of course link in the show notes. So yeah, go and fill that out. So the survey is actually called the Postcode Lottery Survey, right? Which seems accurate because that's very much what trans healthcare feels like. You know, depending on where you live, you might have a very, very different experience. So I think it's worth collecting that data and kind of using it to say, hey, look, we need to stop doing this regional centre thing. So it's time to move away from the gender clinic model and maybe start putting some of this stuff out to primary care, so it's more available there on the ground. Wouldn't that be nice?
It would be lovely.
But yeah, let's gather some data first, so please do fill that out.
Before they make the data dodgy to take.
And next up we have the charity Football vs Homophobia having their annual Football v Transphobia Week of Action. So from March 25th through to Trans Day Visibility on March 31st, they're encouraging you, or anyone really, to promote trans inclusion in football, amplify trans voices, and just generally make trans people feel safe and heard in the sport. Which is wonderful. As someone who was petrified every time PE came round, as, you know, for multiple reasons, this is very cool and very nice, and it's good to see. And resources for that are on the Football v Homophobia website, and doubtless they'll be posting cool stuff on socials during the week as well, so go check it out.
Hell yeah, bring more positivity to trans people in sports, because talking of the football, there's that really cool documentary by the Trans Radio UK football team, wasn't there?
Yes.
I need to fully watch it. I almost did it last night, but I had to go to bed pretty early to then do the recording in the morning, so couldn't get around to seeing it. But it seems also trans kids deserve better have got one, so, you know.
All the cool kids are making documentaries.
Indeed they seem to be.
Yeah. All the cool
Foreshadowing is a narrative device.
And speaking of Trans Day Visibility, on the 30th of March there is going to be an event in Newcastle on 1 Strawberry Lane that is, for Trans Day Visibility, so if you're in the area, get down there. It's being done with the people at Bookworm in Durham, who do a few events in the northeast area, particularly Durham. I know it's not really protest related, but in the interest of, community connection and all that, then, there's also trans craft events that you can go to. I think they're at the People's Bookshop. I think I was speaking to someone that's involved in that recently, and they were telling me about their zine called Wolfpack that's really cool, and I'm pretty sure it featured one of the poems that I'd heard at a vigil. So anyway, that's Northeast stuff.
The group Nottingham Against Transphobia is organising a counter-protest in response to a certain grifting Nazi who has a history with soup, who has a scheduled appearance in the city on the 28th of March. So if you're able to volunteer your support as a marshal, first aider, observer, or just to provide your support, you can contact Nottingham Against Transphobia via their Instagram. Yeah.
Yep. That's it for Action Alley. Sorry, it's a bit of a shorter one this week, but some weeks are better than others. We're going to have to get on with the news. Oh no. Very sad, very sad. But first, we're going to take a nice jaunty little hop across the pond. What we've started doing when we're looking at the American stories is kind of front-loading them, so that we'll deal with the slightly more negative stories first, and then we'll do the slightly more positive ones towards the end. We've got quite a few stories to get to, so we've done 3 kind of in-depth and 6 more as a kind of, Lightning round, yeah. Good phrasing. And in each case, we're going to start with the ropey news first. So with that said, to Texas. where the State Attorney General Kenneth Paxton has declared that any previously issued changes of gender markers on state documents like birth certificates and driver's licenses are now to be reverted, saying that all court orders to change them are null and void. Here's a quote from a letter that Paxton wrote to Texas Department of Public Safety Director Colonel Freeman F. Martin. There's some Latin legalese in this letter that I'll translate once we get to the end, and I promise I won't do my comedy Texas accent because this story's kind of serious. The judicial power endowed to district courts does not countenance ex parte orders directing state agencies to amend a person's biological sex on driver's licenses or birth certificates. The underlying proceedings are coram non judice, and the resulting orders are void. State agencies must immediately correct any unlawfully altered driver's licenses or birth certificates that were changed pursuant to such orders. So ex parte means, quote, a legal proceeding brought by one party in the absence of and without representation of or notification to the other party. And coram non judice means not before a judge and is another legal term which is usually used, quote, to indicate a legal proceeding that is outside the presence of a judge. Thanks, Wikipedia.
Thank you, Wikipedia.
Cheers.
So basically, Paxton's letter is saying that trans people's changes of gender markers are null and void because the court doesn't have the authority to make those changes, in his opinion. He's also made a point of referring to any changes as unlawful, which is more a statement about what he wishes was the case than something that accurately reflects current law. Paxton's interpretation hinges on a Texas law from 1936, with his letter saying it is unreasonable to suggest that the original public meaning of sex in 1936 somehow included a psychosocial concept that had not yet been invented, which is ahistorical as well as being just plain wrong. The OG Nazis had already smashed and burned the Berlin Institute für Sexualwissenschaft by 1936 because, shocker, trans people existed back then too. I could spend ages talking about just this one case, but I'm going to move us on. However, if you are interested, there is an excellent write-up of this by Erin Reed of Erin in the Morning, so we'll link that in the usual place. So did you catch this one?
Yeah, I don't think he has the immediate authority to decide if the court doesn't have the authority, because a lot of his argument here is stuff that is not actually correct. It is just what he wants, and it's basically him posturing quite intimidatingly, I would say, in my opinion. It is a kind of grandstanding posturing, look big and mean and authoritative enough, and then people will just fall in line without going, actually, we need to test the mettle of that legality first, because, I don't know, this looks inherently unconstitutional to me, a non-lawyer who's not American.
It just screams the "you have no authority here, Jackie Weaver."
Yeah, it is. It's very much it is deliberate. Like they know that they're bullshitting here, in my opinion. I think they know that they're bullshitting. They just are giving license to the people who want to do this shit anyway, and intimidating the people who don't want to do this shit to do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think quite a lot of the stuff that the Trump administration and its flunkies are doing is hoping and kind of being intimidating to try and get organizations to comply in advance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Without specifically being told, because they'll read the writing on the wall and say, oh, well, we need to do this now. And then everybody starts doing that.
And also to treat all of these moves as legitimate and in good faith.
Yes.
Which they are fundamentally not.
So that's Texas out of the way.
Now to
Alex?
Germany. Well, technically. So the next one is more about another country's reaction to the US, now being even more of a hellscape for LGBTQ plus people. Germany has now issued travel advisories for LGBTQ plus people who plan to visit the United States, alongside an organisation called Interpride, which is a worldwide association of more than 400 pride organisations from over 70 countries. Interpride put out a statement over social media which said, quote, due to an executive order issued by the US President on January 20th, all travellers must select either male or female when applying for entry or visas. The gender listed at birth will be considered valid. If your passport has X as a gender marker or differs from your birth assigned gender, we strongly recommend contacting the US diplomatic mission before travelling to confirm entry requirements. This is especially concerning given that Washington DC was selected as the host city for this year's World Pride, and it's due to take place in June, and one Canadian LGBTQ plus group, EGAL Canada, has already cancelled its planned participation in World Pride. They said, quote, "This decision is foremost based on the need to safeguard our trans and non-binary staff who would face questionable treatment at land and aviation borders to attend such convenings, and to stand with solidarity with global colleagues who are experiencing similar fear around the entry to the United States." And the phrase questionable treatment is doing some real heavy lifting here. Another group, the African Human Rights Coalition, have called on other LGBTQ plus groups to boycott World Pride this year. Describing the US as being governed by an antagonist fascist regime, a spokesman said. Although probably impossible to hold elsewhere at such late notice, World Pride must consider withdrawing the event from the USA and come out with a strong statement condemning the US for the dangerous environment it presents to LGBTQI plus people entering the country. Tara Demont, the National Director of Programs at Amnesty International USA, spoke to the aforementioned Erin in the Morning and said that there is a real threat of profiling and targeting trans, non-binary and genderqueer travellers with real implications for their safety and security. The US government has instructed consular offices to deny applications made by transgender athletes, which opens the door to block visas for people who have quote-unquote misrepresented their sex with their application. And Demant also points out that the Border Patrol Authority looks at your passport, looks at you, and thinks, that's not what I think a woman looks like, and what does that mean for someone who's travelling with them? Now, they have to prove that their gender identity aligns with their sex they're assigned at birth, which are non-scientific and very discriminatory way of understanding sex and gender. So, if you're due to travel to the US sometime soon, then we suggest at the very least to contact the US consulate here in the UK and get their advice about your travel plans. We'll include contact details for them on our website page for this episode.
Horrifying.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's understandable that there are calls for a boycott, considering I think that the heightened level of danger that anyone going to that event would be taking on is obviously something to consider. When I think about that, that's realistically not really in line with the fact of it's World Pride. It is a very big event that is not to therefore say it's worse for it or anything, but like the idea that if World Pride isn't there, that community has nothing is very black and white thinking. It feels like this location with this current scenario happening, it feels like a trap. And it's not, that's not to say it is, obviously, it's just it's that thing of like, okay, there's some fresh water in the lion's den, but I'm still gonna have to get past the lions.
Yeah, and World Pride, I mean, it's more of an event than a pride as a protest in this sense as well. If it was one where they'd make it more of a protest sort of thing, then it would be something. But because of the nature of it being a World Pride and it could be used as a pinkwashing opportunity, if it does continue, they need to take a key eye look at that as well.
So sticking with Washington DC,
I know that we've all been pretty frustrated about looking through all of the news from the USA and the pretty clearly perceived lack of pushback from the Democratic Party, who largely seem to be rolling over and letting the MAGA Republicans completely fuck the entire future. And in particular, they seem happy for the Republicans to straight up bully their newly elected House representative from Delaware, Sarah McBride. As we've mentioned on the show before, McBride is a trans woman. She was the catalyst behind the Representative Nancy Mace to slam through a rule that said House representatives have to use the toilet that aligns with their assigned sex at birth, rather than their actual gender. Given that McBride is the only trans person currently in the House and the rule was put only through after her election, this was obviously an extremely targeted act. The Democrats, and it must be said McBride herself, didn't really put up much of a fight to stop this from happening. But maybe, just maybe, we've seen some signs that this might be about to change. This is because in a meeting of the House Foreign Relations Subcommittee on March 11th, the chair of the meeting, Texas Republican Keith Self, deliberately misgendered McBride, referring to her as the gentleman from Delaware. And McBride instantly shot back, calling Self Madam Chair. Her Democratic colleague, however, Bill Keating from Maryland, then took up the mantle and asked Self, "Have you no decency?" This next bit we will be doing as a short play, with Alyx as Keith Self and Ashleigh as Bill Keating.
Mr. Chairman, could you repeat your instruction again, please?
Yes, we've set the standard of the floor of a house, and I'm simply...
What is that standard, Mr. Chairman? Could you repeat what you just said when you introduced a duly elected representative from the United States of America, please?
I will. The representative from Delaware, Mr. McBride.
Mr. Chairman, you are out of order. Have you no decency? I've come to know you a little bit, but this is not decent.
We'll continue this hearing.
You will not continue it with me unless you introduce a duly elected representative the right way.
At which point, Self adjourned the meeting, ending the session. Right afterwards, Self started posting about it on Twitter, saying, "It is the policy of the United States to recognize two sexes, male and female," echoing the executive order signed by Trump back in January. We're also pretty sure that Keating's use of the phrase, "have you no decency," is itself a callback to the 1950 session of the House Un-American Activities Committee, where Senator Joseph McCarthy was asked this question after his relentless pursuit of perceived communists was widely having seen as overreached. The question has become part of the political lexicon in the US, usually used when someone is viewed as having gone much too far. We hope that this is only the beginning of the Democrats' long overdue fight against the fascists who have overtaken the US government. So I was glad to see this. Glad to see this. It does feel like quite a little.
Yes.
And it's one of those things where it's like, I don't know if the amount of action that we would want to see from McBride is going to match up with the amount of action she would actually be able to take before she is just like censured or found in contempt or something like akin to that, right? But I do feel as though this energy we need more of, we need much more of, and we do need it. We've needed it from before this point.
We need it yesterday.
And so I'm glad that this happened, but I feel uncomfortable letting my happiness from that turn to a reassurance that now they're fighting back fully and totally. Pick up momentum, please, and more energy like that from people like Keating as well, because that is what will enable Sarah McBride and any closeted trans members of Congress or whatever to be able to vocally support and vocally assert their rights, their right to decency.
I saw a post recently where when you saw the Democrat leader Chuck Schumer capitulate to the budget that Trump had put out, their polling ratings went down, but when they dramatically fell. But then when you got to they voted against the bill for a sports ban, there was a nice little peak upwards. Being an ally is still something that shows you've got some gumption.
And realistically, in America, it seems, we're at the point where the fascists are in the room. They're running the meetings, right? Fascism is what is happening in America. What is now being built, what is now being attempted is the authoritarianism. That is what is being constructed next, because you've got the foundation of fascism. Now it's the authoritarianism that's being built on top of that to, prevent any fight back to the fascism. And that's where Trump's heading, at least in my eyes. And you need to stop that at every single fucking turn. You need to state clearly and openly that this is not legitimate. It is not constitutional. It is not, that this is, and this is a very small example because it's a very, very basic form of everyday decency. But if you recognize it in these situations, you need to be stepping up in the big ones. You need to be denying these meetings their legitimacy when they are regarding things that are going to bring in authoritarian fuckery. Please, please, please.
Yeah, please do a bit more. Just quickly before we move on, there has been an article in Notice about Sarah McBride, and the kind of quote that she's given to them is that, we need to make a bigger tent.
Yes.
But a lot of people have interpreted that as McBride saying, we need to try and build common cause with some fascists and fascist adjacent people. We need to kind of make the tent bigger, is saying, are you saying that we should try and bring some more Republicans across? Because that has been her intention. And she says that she's had a number of conversations with Republicans, and they've come away from the meeting seeing things more from her perspective. Whether they vote based on those principles, who the hell knows? So, yeah, there is a lot of the discourse around McBride at the moment, and we will include a link to that Notice article in the description. As we've said, we're going to approach some more US stories in a lightning round kind of way, because as ever, there is a lot going on. Some of these are much heavier than the others, so we'll start with those and work our way through to some more positive stories. And unfortunately, this first story comes with a content warning for police violence and the death of a trans woman. If you can't listen to this right now, please skip ahead to the time code Amber is about to give you.
37 minutes and 4 seconds.
Thanks, Amber. More details have now emerged in the death of trans sex worker Linda Becerra Moran. She made a call to 911 on the morning of February 7th and told the operator that she had been kidnapped, restrained, physically abused, and was scared of being trafficked. Once the officers arrived at the hotel room she was in, they shot her. She died on February 27th after being taken off life support. The LAPD did not even acknowledge her death for over a week. So, ACAB.
Yep. Fuck 'em.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Fuck 'em.
Absolutely horrid. So for the next story, despite what we've seen with Sarah McBride and Bill Keating, some quote-unquote moderate Democrats are still taking what you'd expect to be the quiet part and saying it really loud, like Jonathan Knott, the former senior advisor to equally former centrist Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Moderates are having their moment, said Knott. I think people are realising that there are many reasons we lost in 2024, but an acquiescence to all of the liberal groups and fighting and dying on hills about 1 and 2 and 3% of the voting population seem to be really dumb. Ugh.
That's such a stupid take.
It is.
That's just not actually. Oh my god. Whatever, dude. Fucking whatever, dude. So, because a lot of the back and forth over trans rights in America takes place in the courtroom, that's where we're going for the next few stories. Unfortunately, this first one sets a troubling precedent. The Ninth Circuit Court, which is a federal court that hears cases from Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, and Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, is considered a fairly liberal and progressive court. But not this time, because they have ruled to uphold a bathroom ban and to, quote Erin Reed, once again, that the rights of cisgender people to not have a transgender person in the same bathroom are more important than the equal protection of trans students. The ruling explicitly categorizes trans students as being to the opposite sex of the changing room, with sex specifically defined as their sex assigned at birth. This means that trans girl students will be forced to use the boys' changing room, and vice versa. And I guess just fuck you to anyone that's non-binary, right? So this is a pretty grim precedent to set, and could pave the way for further repression of trans people in the US.
Next, let's go to Ohio, where the state's Court of Appeals ruled that a ban on gender-affirming care for the under-18s is unconstitutional, reversing the legislation that was put in place last summer. But the same ruling also apparently banned trans women and girls from playing female sports, So it's a little bit like a gentle caress with one hand and getting punched in the dick with the other. Is it still progress if a ruling does both of those things?
It's a deeply confused ruling, regardless.
Sticking with the courts, going federal this time to US District Judge Anna Reyes, who struck down Trump's executive order ban on transgender people in the military. Again, on the basis that it's probably unconstitutional and violates trans service members' rights. And in her ruling, the out-gay judge said, quote, "The court knows that this opinion will lead to heated public debate and appeals, and in a healthy democracy, both are positive outcomes. We should all agree, however, that every person who has answered the call to serve deserves our gratitude and respect."
And finally, in Every Accusation is a Confession news, let's talk about Republican State Senator for Minnesota, Justin Eichhorn. In the past, he's gone on record as saying he wants to, quote-unquote, protect women and girls from those evil trans people, and made headlines on Monday 17th for including a bill to make Trump derangement syndrome into an actual mental illness. Now, hearing all of that, why don't you have a guess at what he was arrested for a few hours after introducing his bill? I'll wait. That's right! He was arrested at night on Monday, 17th of March, for allegedly soliciting prostitution from a 17-year-old girl. According to a statement from the Bloomington Police Department, police officers were in contact with Eichhorn, who believed, quote, he was talking to a 17-year-old female, so they arranged to meet on Monday evening and arrested him. Gross, horrifying, get in the bin.
They project more than the IMAX projector I'm going to later.
Yeah. Let's bring it home. Let's come on back to the UK. Because there's a fair bit of stuff to get through for us this week as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, what a mess this is.
It very much is. So, you've probably heard about this one. Let's talk about the Sullivan Review, which was a independent report into sex and gender data commissioned under the Tories, and it was published on the government's website, and it was the same amount of independent as the Cass Review was. The report is from UCL's Social Research Institute and was led by Professor Alice Sullivan. Sullivan is a member of Sex Matters Advisory Group. The review also makes extensive use of completely unbiased data from the Scottish anti-trans group Murray Blackburn Mackenzie. Now, we don't know what recommendations, if any, the government will take seriously, but it has been circulated to all government departments, and Wes Streeting has already tweeted, or X'd, or Twixt, whatever, about the review and the importance of biological sex. The full report is over 200 pages long and includes dozens of recommendations. It takes an explicitly binary view of sex throughout. It even goes so far as to complain about the acronym LGBTQI+, considering intersex to be an unhelpful error. Many of the Sullivan Review's recommendations centre on reducing confusion or ambiguity. Although I'm sure we've all seen confusing forms and surveys, there's got to be better options than what the Sullivan Review puts forward. The review recommends questions on sex and gender identity should be separate, and that it's always preferable to record biological sex rather than legal sex, even if someone has a gender recognition certificate. On that basis, it also recommends that the NHS stop allowing trans people to change their gender marker in the system. Another example of how the Sullivan Review suggests reducing confusion is for research questions to use the phrase males who identify as women rather than trans women. Sullivan suggests the phrase sex assigned at birth is inaccurate because sex is determined at conception, which it isn't. And it's an idea that rather sounds like one of Trump's executive orders.
It's just not true. Sorry.
It is not true, not even slightly. Go back and do your biology homework. Poor 2 out of 10 see me. And although Sex Matters is one of 4 charities that were consulted by the review, the paper does not mention Sullivan's connection to Sex Matters. Transactual and the Feminist Gender Equality Network have already come together and issued a statement against the Sullivan Review, and the charity Mermaids has also issued a response. Both of these responses take, a principled approach. The review is bigger than any single phrase we might pluck from it, and even where it purports to use the language of inclusion, the agenda of sex matters and groups like them is still present. We know that there are other independent reports on the way, and we will look at those as they release. So this was big news, wasn't it?
Yeah, and first of all, that's not how conception works.
Nope, not even slightly.
Like at all, and that's not even some specialist knowledge. That's literally the shit that you get told when you're like 12 years old in school.
Yeah.
There's so many issues with this. Secondly, of course, that's a conflict of interest. Of course, like this review, quote unquote review, is about as independent as my fucking toes are from my feet. There's not, you just
yeah, like exactly like the Cass review. Like it was like the Cass review, but Cass was actually good at hiding the evidence of that anti-transness. But for the Sullivan review, the fingerprints are on the gun.
It reads like propaganda. It just straight up reads like propaganda. And at least with the Cass review, it still read like propaganda, but it read like propaganda that was feigning social science. This is just, here's some opinions, and I'm gonna say that they're facts. Because I've got letters by my name. And that is not how that fucking works.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Pretty much.
It's, I think I saw from Transactional statement. The review is providing an academic gloss on what is a political call to strip trans people of our hard-won rights to privacy, dignity, and respect.
Yeah,
yep.
Absolutely.
Which it is. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And just to say, it was so kind of propagandized, and it hadn't even bothered trying to bury the bodies. The Cass review took a few days to analyse. The Sullivan review took like a few hours. So there's the difference. Relatedly to this, where it's kind of a review that's been put out with the intention of influencing the NHS in particular, really quickly, because this thing that we're about to talk about happened literally yesterday. The NHS has deleted all guidance information about changing gender and NHS number, among other trans-related questions, like a mismatch between a patient's gender and title, and how to process a name change, stuff like that. The page that was previously titled Adoption and Gender Reassignment, that used to contain this information, is now simply titled Adoption. There have, at time of recording, been no statements or announcements about this. It's just gone. I'd call this Orwellian, but we have a new word for that now, Trumpian. On social media, the person who brought this to attention, FoxDie over on Blue Sky, pointed out the guidance explaining the process to ensure no records were lost in transfer and telling GPs there was no requirement for any set level of transition and could happen at any time, and patients were entitled to this, was so valuable, and said that there were a number of well-meaning but confused GPs who thought that maybe even some kind of surgery would have to take place in order to process a name change. The form to submit the appropriate information is still up, but now asks GPs to click on a box to confirm that they've read guidance, which no longer exists on the NHS website. Although, of course, it's on the Internet Archive because the Internet Archive is brilliant and should be protected.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't see a universe wherein which it is likely that this was an accident. That shit came out and then this immediately happens. Oh no, you knew, you were primed, you were waiting, as far as my personal opinion on this matter goes. I just... It's very deliberate because it's not even the case of like, oh, this page is down. It's edited. It's erasure. It's straight up erasure.
It is, yeah. And like, particularly with them not having announced it, that, you know, it's just disappeared. And they've not said anything about it. It's like, oh, this was a mistake, or we're kind of reworking this. There's been no announcement whatsoever, no information about why. It's just gone. Who prompted that and what's... I mean... if I could take a guess who prompted it and what their end game was.
Yeah.
Fun times in the NHS. Let's move on.
Yeah.
To the Metropolitan Police. Woo.
So, you may know all about the tribunals about trans people existing in changing spaces, but just for a change, how about a tribunal on people just celebrating their existence? So, on the 10th of March, a tribunal was heard in which the claimant, Melanie Newman, claimed that the Met Police were allegedly hostile to people with anti-trans views, and the main reason cited for this was an event organised for Trans Visibility Day inside of the Met by a trans officer. They claimed that the invitation of activist Eva Echo left her with no choice but to launch complaints, and whilst the case is due to finish this week as of time of release, we'll still wait for when a verdict has been reached.
Yeah, so we covered a story in, I forget which episode number it was. It was in the teens, 115 or 16, I think. And there was, so some people in the Metropolitan Police had tried to put together a scene group, a sex equality and equity, the new way of saying gender critical, so it sounds a little bit more respectable.
That. Yeah.
But the Metropolitan Police said no.
I've heard from an inside source. I think there's not been any big announcement about it either, but I have heard that there has been some recognition
of the scene. Right.
Well.
I mean, listen. Like, do I really expect cops, the fucking Met Police of all, to actually stand up for us and be good allies? No, you can paint as many pride flags on top of cars as much as you fucking want. I'm not going to trust you. That's just my personal stance. But regardless, this shit shouldn't be fucking happening.
Agreed.
At the end of the day, I can have vehement, consistent disagreements with this workplace, but this is still a workplace where the workers should be able to express and to share support for marginalized communities, especially because these are meant to be the people that actually do the protecting of the law that protects us.
I think this has definitely been, what we said about complying in advance.
Yes.
I think this is one of those complaints that's kind of gone in loudly. The person's submitted a complaint and also gone to the press about it, saying that, well, if you run a trans event of any kind, there will be pushback from it now. We're not even going to let you talk about Trans Visibility Day or talk about the importance of being aware that trans people exist.
Yes, no, it's going for the argument that trans recognition, acknowledgement even of trans people being a thing that exists within this world is inherently discriminatory.
Yes.
And that is so insidiously evil of a stance to take, but nonetheless it is the one being taken and debated in our courts. And so I feel like, I feel like there's so many possibilities for this case to end up, even if it's not a total win for the transphobe in question. I'm still concerned that this is going to have some really shitty, not even chips away, chunks out of our ability to vocally show up, be ourselves, express ourselves, and for allies to do the same thing, to make workspaces, appreciate the trans people within the workspaces.
And also, like we've seen, this case has also outed the officer who's done the organising as well, and it's continued that terrifying precedent of if you've got a workplace grievance with your trans colleague, you can out them in public the moment you bring it to a court.
Yeah.
Yes. It's a tactic of humiliation via the legal system and shaming. In my opinion, it is to send the message that if you are vocal and if you also raise too much of a stink about transphobia, then you will be put in the stocks, you will be shamed, you will be humiliated, you will have a target put on your fucking back, and you will have the entire force of the mainstream media machine put against you. And it is gross, and it is dehumanizing, and it is intrusive. And I'm also concerned about the way in which these now consistent tribunals and cases civilly about trans people at work, I am worried that it is going to make some employers not exactly decide to just not follow the law and not hire trans people or exclude trans people, but I feel like they're going to be many people who are within that sphere. They listen to a lot of those media sources because they have millions of readership, right? And they're going to view trans people in the workplace as a liability inherently, and it's going to make them less likely to hire trans people. It's going to make them less likely to support trans people if they bring up anything, or if they try to, encourage this same kind of community spirit of, hey, this is an event that's happening and it's a thing that's important to my community and I want to be able to share that. And that's I'm concerned because we all knew that this was really about getting trans people pushed out of public spaces.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, speaking of people with exclusionary views and aims, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, has this week voted for its new president. And of the 7 candidates, the winner was the only woman, Kirsty Coventry, which, should be good, right? No, unfortunately, Coventry has previously stated that she intends to, quote, protect women's sport, and it has previously been suggested that she's in favour of banning transgender participants from the Olympics. So we'll have to wait and see what policies are enacted ahead of the 2028 LA Games, who gets excluded, and on what grounds. And this is horrifying, obviously, for trans people, but I really have to mention how deeply racialized the implementation and enforcement of these policies often tends to be. And it is going to be cis women as well that bear the brunt of that, and cis women that aren't white that bear the brunt of that level of intrusion, and that is deeply fucking fucked. And I'm swearing so much on this pod. I've got
no, that's okay. I mean, it's deeply fucked, and also I recently read a book from a cool academic, Cherie Becker, who's written this book called Open Sports, who sort of goes over like how the sex testing that they go through is like deeply inaccurate. It's just unnecessarily arbitrary. They don't do it for the men's sport, they just do it for the women's. And it does make some interesting points about, but would be in a whole other tangent about sports, but maybe that'll be something I explore at another time.
Yeah, it's in part because like the kind of science that's being done here, and I say science with big quotation marks around it, but the kind of feigned attempts at science that's happening here, it's because it ultimately boils down to phrenology, which, if anyone doesn't know, it's the study of features of the body to determine essentially its worth. It actually dates back hundreds of years, and it is a deeply racist, prejudiced form of, again, not science. Whenever I see the ways in which people are trying to create these policies to, quote unquote safeguard and this, that, the other, it just comes across like phrenology. It just comes across to me like when I was having to learn about how people would decide that big ears and a heavy brow meant that you're more likely to steal or be. And that's, again, deeply racist, deeply predatory way of viewing humans and human bodies, and I hate it.
And also Sebastian Coe lost.
Yeah, well, which was the main thing really, but unfortunately what we've ended up with is hardly better.
Yeah.
So, moving on then. So this story is a bit of a breakdown of a story from Trans Safety Network, who are awesome and deserve your support, so go and check them out if you haven't already. Every time we talk about Trans Safety Network, I say, hey, go check them out, because they are excellent. So let's talk about the Society for Evidence-Based Gender Medicine, or SEGM, SEGM.
And you don't think the acronym's just a little clunky?
I know, it was quite catchy.
If that name sounds familiar, it might be because we have spoken about them before late last year. There seem to be a number of NHS gender clinicians involved with them, including Michael Absood, who is now the Deputy Chief Investigator for the upcoming Pathways puberty blocker trial, which I'm sure is absolutely fine and will not result in any bullshit science coming out of Pathways. Now, though, there seems to be somebody else on the roster of SEGM. Back in October, Amit Jassi, the head of the NHS's only specialist service that deals with body dysmorphic disorder, or BDD, gave a talk at the same SEGM event we briefly mentioned in episode 115. Jassi's talk was called Body Dysmorphic Disorder and Gender Dysphoria. After her talk, she participated in a Q&A session on body image and control alongside Anastasis Spiliadis, who's the inventor of so-called gender exploratory therapy, which is rebranded conversion therapy, and Alexander Corte, author of the snappily titled Elective Affinities, Trans-Identification and Anorexia Nervosa as Maladaptive Attempts to Solve Developmental Conflicts in Female Adolescents.
Rolls off the tongue.
Just rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? Helpfully, we don't know what was said at this event because there is no public record of it. As Trans Safety Network describe it, Jassy didn't appear on a panel that reflected the current state of the field, which is way more diplomatic than what we'd have said. And they pointed out that even the moderator of this Q&A session was an anti-transition radical, referring to Leslie Elliott Boyce, who is described as a counsellor specialising in gender confusion, detransition, and DEI discrimination.
Every time.
Wholesome stuff.
Yeah, it's the your actual specialities are a gaslight. That's all of that is that's your job title. It's a gaslight.
As you might imagine, if there's somebody who's happy to participate in an event like this, with people like this, they may not have the best interests of their trans patients at heart. So what does a BDD specialist have to say about gender dysphoria that appealed so much to the SEGM they got her in for a talk? So cast your mind back a whole goddamn year to when the cast review was fresh news, because according to paragraph 5.38 of that accursed document, after undergoing treatment for BDD, some young people say they no longer feel ill at ease with their birth-registered gender. After a Freedom of Information request, Trans Safety Network got this summary of a clinical expert group meeting back. This was acknowledged to be a complex area with wide-ranging views. Members brought to the discussion their professional experiences of gender dysphoria, as well as other areas, such as body dysmorphic disorder, as they discussed the patient cohort. Treatment to manage distress were discussed, e.g. cognitive behavioural therapy and dialectical behaviour therapy, as were considerations in relation to the changing epidemiology and the unknowns surrounding the medical pathway. So I'm just going to do what we probably should have been doing all along and quote directly from the TSN article. Perhaps this is coincidence, or perhaps there are a group of clinicians working within NHS BDD services who believe that some young people expressing trans identities are actually suffering from BDD, and that CBT and medication will resolve their desire to transition. Which is worrying as shit.
Yeah, the medication we need is HRT.
Yeah.
It's just becoming very clear that Pathways, is purely about the ways to pathologize trans people. That's what that name means. Fuck the annoying anagram that we all had to remember for that one article we did. That is what the point of this is. The ways to pathologize trans people. The ways to deny us a right to exist as we are, and instead, give us any other acronyms in the book that you can, and to also manipulate and to weaponize any other mental health issues that a trans person may have to go, that's the problem. It's not that you're trans, it's that. It's not that you're trans, it's this. You need CBT, you need this, you need that, and then you'll stop wanting to be trans. And babes, if only it were that fucking simple. Do you not think that if that was possible, it would have happened by now?
Yeah, we've tried.
the amount of things that people usually go through when at least if you recognize it later on in life, the amount of ways that you will try to understand yourself before finally realizing what it is.
Yeah, it's like the Pathways is turning out to be, rather than a nice pathway, a highway to hell.
Yeah, I think I had such high hopes, and I don't know why. I don't know why I keep being optimistic about these things, because, the cast review was announced as an, quote, independent review, and it wasn't. And unfortunately, I was hoping that they would do this study properly, with like science and everything, and get the results that say, hey, it turns out gender affirming care is helpful. Crazy stuff, right?
What a surprise.
But I think they're going to be looking for all of the ways to try and distort it. So that sucks and should be fought and will be. So that's good.
Yeah.
Onward we go.
So Hungary for some more news. There seems to be a lot of news coming out of Hungary. And in this case, one positive and one that is utterly shit. Now we would ask you if you'd like the good news first or the bad news first, but this isn't live, so we'll pick for you. So, the bad news. A law has been passed which now bans Pride events. It's due to come into effect on the 15th, and if anyone attends any of these events, Hungary has threatened to fine €500. The Hungarian government has also claimed that the facial recognition tools will also be used in such cases. During the parliamentary session when the law was passed, Liberal lawmakers had protested by firing off smoke grenades inside of the chamber. Perhaps certain democratic lawmakers in other countries can learn some lessons from this. Just a thought. Anyway, on to slightly better news. A trans man from Iran, known to the court as VP, was seeking asylum in Hungary in 2014. Despite VP providing medical records as evidence of his gender identity, the asylum authority logged him as female. In 2022, VP tried to correct this, but the Hungarian Asylum Authority rejected his request on the basis that VP had not provided proof of surgery. In Hungary, several policies have led to legal gender recognition being effectively non-existent in the country. So VP challenged this using General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, which is a EU-wide law. GDPR does several things, but importantly, it empowers regular people to know what data is kept about them and the right to rectify incorrect data. The ECJ found that Hungary, or any other EU state, has to comply with GDPR and give trans people the right to rectify their data. The absence of national laws to recognise trans identity is not an excuse to deny people their rights. The ECJ also found that if the purpose of the data is to identify a person, then their gender identity is the relevant information, not their sex assigned at birth. And finally, the ECJ stated that if any evidence is needed to prove gender identity, a medical certificate should be enough. The court reaffirmed that legal gender change cannot, under any circumstances, require surgery. On the whole, a pretty good outcome. And although UK GDPR and EU GDPR split, thanks to Brexit, they're still largely cross-compatible and governed by the same principles.
Yeah, so a bit of a mixed bag from Hungary this week.
Yeah, really mixed bag.
Like, how are they getting away with being so authoritarian as banning pride marches, which is openly and obviously discriminatory, right, as part of the EU, which has rules about human rights and about freedom of expression? How is the EU kind of allowing this to take place? I mean, what could they really do about it? I guess sanctions and censures and whatever, but nevertheless, if they're
kicking them out.
Yeah, quite. If they're part of that bloc, but they're not abiding by the terms of that bloc, why are they still involved?
Yeah.
Yeah, what? They should just Brexit themselves out of the EU, honestly.
Yeah, Brexit.
I suppose on the front of the ruling, it's good to see stuff like this, and if we're lucky, someone might bring it up in discussion of the UK's data use.
Yeah, with regards to VP rather than regards to pride marches.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly.
Being able to interact with and change your data is like a fundamental right as guaranteed by GDPR. So if it works there, it might work here. But someone would need to go to court and challenge it, which is an expensive headache as it is. But, you know, that's not for us to do because we're far too poor to go to the High Court.
But it could be of some use to Ryan Castellucci's case as well for the X mark.
Yeah,
very true.
Definitely. I mean, it is good that the ECJ found this. I hope that it's actually going to lead to change.
Yeah.
And the use of data with the Sullivan Review and how that talks about the sex assigned at birth, and this court case shows otherwise. It's come at a very interesting time to, in essence, almost basically contradict it.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I don't think Viktor Orban, the leader of Hungary, is going to be inclined to listen to the EU, really, which, again, makes me wonder why they even bothered joining. Anyway, so... Let's stay international, shall we?
Next up, we've got news coming in from Namibia. We have a story in which the country's president, Nangolo Mumba, has rejected resigning a bill brought by the National Assembly which is sought to ban same-sex marriage and to criminalize homosexuality, including fines of up to 100,000 Namibian dollars, which is around about 4,250 quid, or 6 years imprisonment. Now, in this move, it appears that the president has rejected it by claiming it was unconstitutional and that the bill was not passed by 2/3 of the assembly, and alongside that was also concerned as to whether the bill had gone through the proper lawmaking processes. Now, where the bill goes from here, we aren't really sure. However, it appears that this came at the end of the latest parliamentary session, which had ended on the 19th of March. But looking ahead to the next parliamentary session, the lawmaker who brought this forward was not elected to that session. So this was their last chance to pass it, and it was roundly rejected by the president. Yeah, some good news.
Yeah, you love to see it.
Love to see it. Good on you, president. Like, that's the vibe. It's kind of a shame that it got to this final step, and it had to be on this one dude to be like, excuse you? No. But I'm glad it's happened, and I'm glad that the person that brought it forward isn't able to do so again. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, exactly. I think it's one where you have to sort of keep an eye on it, because when I was sort of writing this up, I was sort of trying to... I might not be too correct on how I'm saying, on whether this is right, but a party that proposed the bill had managed to get 51 seats out of 104 in that assembly, so it's sort of, we've got to see how much they might try something like this again.
Indeed, but I mean, as has been pointed out before, in situations like this, the reverse is true. So if they try and put something through, even if all 51 of them vote for it, you're going to have 53 people potentially voting against it. So fingers crossed, democracy shall prevail, but in a good way. So we're staying international and heading over to Russia for some kind of not good news. On the 12th of March, the Russian Supreme Court upheld the decision to imprison a transgender anti-war activist. Mark Kislitsyn is a trans man and a Russian anti-war activist who is accused of transferring approximately $10, United States dollars, to a Ukrainian bank account. This was deemed as treason and resulted in a sentence of 12 years at a women's prison in Siberia. Kislitsyn has been held at the prison since November 2024. During this time, he's been denied HRT, forced to shave and wear women's clothing, and he's spent upwards of 70 days in solitary confinement.
The circumstances as to why he has been put in prison are extremely concerning. But I also have to point out that the treatment that he's undergoing is not too dissimilar from the treatment of some trans prisoners within prisons in this country and in other countries.
Indeed.
And yeah, this is a horrifying thing. You shouldn't be in prison for this. And you certainly shouldn't be going through that treatment in prison.
Sucks. Right. However, let's lighten things up, shall we? Let's talk about some people who were very unsuccessful.
Yes, you might almost want to say that they're a loser.
Loser's Corner.
So, Loser's Corner this time round is a teacher feature. That's right, this week's Are You Smarter Than a 10-Year-Old contestant made a challenge in the High Court against a professional conduct panel that dismissed her for saying that being queer is a sin, trans people are confused, and that students should put God before LGBT ideology. No, really, she somehow, for some ungodly reason, well, maybe too godly reason, thought that she could win this. And listen, I know that the Lord works in mysterious ways, but that is beyond asking for a miracle. Now, obviously, the court rejected her claims that the PCP took her comments out of context, but how do we know that she said this stuff at all? Well, a fantastic anti-fascist sleeper agent, by which we mean a normal child with a good head on their shoulders and kindness in their heart, was writing down her comments after being encouraged to by parents to get evidence of any transphobic comments that she makes. So credit to this kid's mum for showing them the dangers of letting people provide sermons within classrooms and teaching them how to fight back when people are using their authority to inappropriately radicalize children to dehumanize living people. More of that energy, please. Turns out you weren't smarter than a 10-year-old after all, which means you definitely don't deserve to be teaching any. And a final point to consider here, the fact that the kid was encouraged to do this makes me wonder if the teacher had been saying things like this for some time, but that this was simply the first time that there was evidence of it to be able to take it to disciplinary action, which, is concerning because we don't really know how much damage has been done. And also, just gonna say, not gonna lie, when I first opened this link and I skimmed through the article, I saw the acronym for Professional Conduct Panel and thought that she got fired for having a transphobic rant while on PCP in the classroom. And I'm glad that that's not the case because that sounds like the script for an Always Sunny episode. So, silver linings, I guess.
Yeah,
silver linings for my reading comprehension.
Yeah, it's always good when a teacher is not on drugs when they're teaching. Although this one might as well have been, given she was spouting some bullshit.
Yeah, some pretty extreme bullshit, and also quite confidently too. And hold up, if you thought that we were done. Oh, no, my sweet cherubs. Never. We've got to hop to Europe quickly for the next loser, because updated guidelines were released for care of trans youth in Switzerland, Austria, and Germany. And it has the lengthy title, S2K Guidelines for Gender Incongruence and Gender Dysphoria in Children and Young Adults, Diagnosis and Treatment. A name which is even longer in the original German. The S2K guidelines recommended the use of puberty blockers and getting them to patients swiftly where the onset of puberty adds time pressure, which is great. But of course, this is Loser's Corner, and we're talking guidance. So, shots were fired at the CAS stitch-up, as they should be, and this German language guidance also took aim, describing CAS's reviews recommendations as restrictive and questionable. In fact, the S2K guidelines suggest clinical experts were not present in the development of the review's recommendations, or at least not transparently so. Immediately after this, the German document boasts that the creation of its own guidelines involved delegating to experts with many years' experience, and that they intend to explain how the S2K guidelines were developed. Oof. The lack of transparency in the CAS review, including the still mysterious composition of its advisory board and assurance group, are things that the S2K guidelines are wholly right to question. The S2K guidance also calls out the CAS review for its misuse of the word exponential when describing the increase in trans patients, a criticism I find delightfully petty.
Yeah.
Conveniently, the S2K guidelines have appendices with commentary on the major literature it cites, including CAS and others. Here, among other things, it questioned the CAS review's opposition to social transition, the discrepancies between the CAS review's data and recommendations, and the fact that the CAS review doesn't declare whether it has any conflicts of interest or not. So, slam dunk, get wrecked, bros.
Yeah, absolutely. No messing about. They're just shots fired, done.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, exactly. And this is like a review that I've found out is bigger than the CAS review and has been going on for even longer than the CAS review, before 2021. So its scope is like, this is bigger than the CAS review if you're going to talk about reviews in this sense.
Amazing.
And it smashed the shit out of the CAS review.
Yeah. More things smashing the shit out of the CAS review, please, because it's kind of my favourite genre of document to read.
It is.
Yeah, destroy it as much as we destroyed the CAS review, Belle.
Mm-hmm.
Bless.
All right. So moving on then. Let's conclude this delicious meal with some
meat.
Some meat.
How can you make pudding if you don't eat your meat?
Yes, so this time we've sat down with some of the fantastic people at Transnational, in this case, Che. So we talked about some stuff like the Levy reviews, some of the cool stuff they're working on, like their Meet Us Heroes campaign, and just to think this was recorded before the Sullivan review came out and their little statement. Might as well roll a clip.
Mm-hmm.
Interview.
All
right, so I'm with Che from Transnational, the pronouns he, him. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, as always. Always a pleasure to speak to What the Trans.
Oh, no, definitely. It's great to chat with you. And I think we've always been enjoying mentioning the See Us, Hear Us campaign every single episode on the Action Alley segment. And I suppose we might as well jump right into it and see how things have been going with that campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I've spoken before about we had our day of action in Parliament, and some people came to Westminster on the day and spoke to their MP, and we had a drop-in session for MPs to come along too, which we were happy with how many people attended. And now what we're wanting to do is to keep encouraging people. If you've not met your MP yet, try and get some time in with them and talk to them about the things that matter to you and the things that are going on for you in your life. You know, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, all of that. And when you've met with them, let us know how it went. And don't just stop with your MP. If you're in Scotland, Wales, or Northern Ireland, speak to your devolved representative, speak to your local councillors, speak to your local integrated care board or health board, you know, to find out what they're up to and sort of offer your support in talking to them about trans people's needs, because these people are making decisions that impact our lives every single day, and they need to have met us.
I suppose it's been a little while since that's happened. So have you had many responses from people, you know, submitting their answers on the portal for that?
We've been having a steady flow, but we'd love more people to be taking part, and we know sometimes it's taking a while for MPs to get back to people because they're relatively new MPs. It takes a remarkable amount of time to set up your office and things like that. But we're hoping they're getting on top of things now, and they really ought to be meeting with us.
I think the last time we spoke as well, we chatted a bit about the Trans Healthcare Alliance, and I'm sure you've got lots of updates on what's happening with the levy review.
Yeah, so the Trans Healthcare Coalition is working hard. I've been in 3 coalition meetings over the past couple of days, and we've got a lot going on. And in terms of where we're up to with the review into services, I've got a few things that I can update people on in terms of what's happening, and there is no info on it on Transnational's website as well. If you go on our homepage, you'll find it. But a few things that we're expecting quite soon. So to catch people up, before Christmas we had a consultation into the existing service specification for English gender clinics for the non-surgical parts of our transition. This is a document that says how gender clinics should run, what model of care they're running to, assessment appointments they should more or less be given, and who should be working there, what types of professionals, and all of that, and how referrals should work, and what discharge looks like at the end as well, and how they work with GPs. So there's a lot in there, and we gave as a coalition members gave feedback on that through the stakeholder consultation, and we provided guidance to other orgs in giving feedback as well. NHS England are due to be reporting on that consultation soon, so we're waiting for that to be published. We know that Dr. Levy and his team have visited all the English gender clinics. Apart from the pilot clinics, they weren't involved. So a couple of gender clinics were sort of exempted from it, but most of the gender clinics were visited. We know that we're expecting his report very soon onto that, and we know there was a survey into trans people's experiences if they're currently under the care of a gender clinic, or they have been in the past. I think it was in the past 5 years. And bizarrely, a survey of friends and family members. We'll be looking very carefully at all of that when it comes out as a coalition, and also within Transnational. And then we've got sort of those 2 documents as they are going to feed into NHS England developing an updated service specification, non-surgical service specification for English gender clinics. So again, that those changes are going to reflect how NHS gender clinics are going to be expected to work in the future. We are expecting that there will be a public consultation on an updated service specification. We have fears about what could be taken out. We've got fears about what could be put in, but also we've got hopes for how things could potentially improve, and things being removed that aren't needed in the service specification. So it's hard to know which direction it's going to go in, but important to wait and see what's in that specification when it comes out. The Trans Healthcare Coalition, which is a coalition of different organisations doing work around this and individuals as well, academics, researchers, health professionals, and just people that make a change. We're, as a coalition, going to be looking very carefully at these documents, and we're going to be able to let the community know what's good about them, what's bad about them, and everything, and give some guidance on responding to the consultation. We don't know when they're going to be published, but what we'll say to the community is, look, bear with us on responding. We'll be able to give a quick temperature check, but bear with us while we take time to properly understand what's in there.
There's always going to be concerns, and it sounds like you're going to be keeping a close eye on things. I heard you mentioning earlier about the pilot clinics, like I think the one in Manchester being exempt from the levy review, despite them having some more different ways of running a service. Wouldn't that be an important thing to mention in the Levi review?
Well, so Manchester, so the Indigo service in Manchester.
Indigo, that was it.
Yeah, and Trans Plus are no longer pilot services, so they were reviewed. East of England gender service, I think Sea Magic in Sussex gender service were not included because they're not yet operating on the sort of the rolling full contract. So yeah, we're really pleased that Indigo and Trans Plus were included because yes, that gave an opportunity for comparison. Yeah.
Perfect. I was from my brain was going to that, but it turns out you had a bit more up to date info there, which was good. So that I didn't say something out of the blue there. But exactly. So we've got the service specification. We've just got to hope that goes well. See, I think we've been seeing some interesting information about Levi, and I suppose we've got to see how that unfolds, really, by the sounds of it. And I think earlier today I saw a post about the conversion therapy ban and the fact that the government had started putting in draft guidance, some draft bill on this. Have you seen anything from the government on that?
I've not seen anything. We're hoping that there won't be any loopholes, and we'll be having a look at sort of any draft bill very closely, and as part of the ban conversion therapy coalition as well. And we'll be certainly talking to MPs about it, and coming back to sort of NHS England service specification for gender clinics. At the moment, it makes it very clear that conversion practices are unacceptable and won't be. There's no place for them in NHS gender clinics, and we're hoping to see that remain in the service specification as well.
No, definitely, and hopefully that also makes sure they don't get the weediness with the exploratory therapies added as well. But fair play. Ivan, hopefully you get a copy of a draft soon on that one. Certainly be interested. Uh, oh yeah, and also yeah, that's a good point as well. Exactly. We'll have to see how that goes. And the healthcare's always been a pain in the neck with the CAS review and everything. And we've seen. I think I saw recently on uh, I recently saw a news article about the CAS review being used in America, and I think one of the parts you were looking at were the 18 to 25 follow-up services that CAS review was mentioning, but then you were going to be having a look at as well.
Yeah, so we were in a meeting with others from the trans and LGBTQ plus sector on last week, and we were asking them about this 18 to 25's follow-up service because there'd been a lot of concerns around it. So what they've said to us is that they're going to look at a few different models of what a follow-through service would look like. It wouldn't be a brand new service standing on its own. It would be hopefully attached to a children and young people's gender service or to an adult gender service, and that they'd be close working with, for example, if it's attached to a children and young people's gender service, with the adult gender services as well. I'd had some questions about, hang on, who's this service for? Apparently, it's for, well, they told us it's for already been under the care of a children and young people's gender service, and people that have been on the waiting list for children and young people's gender service. If it is, an 18-year-old being newly referred for transition related services or transition related care, they'd go straight into the adult service, because what this pathway is about, and it's in line with what the CQC report said all those years ago about GIDS, is it's about smoothing that transition from children and young people's to adult services. What there is a bit of a lack of clarity about is what service specification will that service work to, because it is 18 to 25-year-olds are young adults, and it's Transactional's view that any service for 18 to 25 should be working to an adult gender service specification, and that the service specification for adult services ought to be suitable for adults of all ages. So that's something, and talk of a separate service specification is something that we're keeping a close eye on, and when we're given more information, England will of course share it.
No, definitely. It's hopefully they put together some kind of plan, because if NHS England are sort of leaving 18 to 25-year-olds into some kind of limbo where either they're waiting 8 years for a waiting list and having no care at all after being discharged from GIDS, it would be a bit of a mess. So hopefully the NHS people get their butts in gear on that one, and you'll be continuously checking out that one. By the sounds of things. And speaking of the NHS as well, and their courses about trans young people as well, recently on a previous episode, we were speaking about the MindEd training course and the materials to the CYP service, and we found some really concerning things regarding some of the material. Have you seen some stuff on that, the MindEd course?
Yeah, we'd reviewed when we first became aware of it. We'd reviewed the MindEd materials, and there's very little in there that tells you how to actually support a trans young person. We found it was coming from a very ableist lens. It was it was never coming from, all the case studies with particularly complex cases, and never talking about, well, what about trans young people who for sure know who they are. They're not questioning who they are. So we had a lot of concerns about the suitability, and we were signatories of the letter to NHS England, that there's still, believe it or not, a couple of years later, back and forth over. But Transnational, we do have concerns about what training's being provided to children and young people's mental health services, because now they're part of the care pathway, the referral pathway for the children and young people's gender services. But I've been very training to in sort of general trans inclusion to mental health, NHS mental health services, and the children and young people's practitioners were saying, well, hang on a minute, this care pathway involves us. What training is there for us? So there's still a big question mark about, what training's being
done
given
to the mental, yeah. And this particular minded being endorsed by the NHS is particularly concerning, especially when we've heard about some really bad information about Tilly Langton's involvement, who's been known for conversion therapy.
Yeah, I think I can't be drawn to sort of talk on the work of any particular individual, but what we can say is that we've got concerns about the content and the lens that it's viewing transness through. Being trans is a bad outcome.
One of the main topics we were speaking about last time, because the big topic we were talking about was the whole big story about the GPs withholding people's HRT. We've had some positive developments, and you've probably got some more detailed information on guidance being sent out on a more national level.
Yeah, I mean, this is an ongoing issue, and we know that the Royal College of GPs have amended their guidance a little bit, and that's something we're in ongoing conversations with them about, and also, where NHS England have said that their review of the creation of a policy for hormone prescribing, a national policy, some way to helping the matter. Actually, we've been in touch with them and said this is something that's happening. People being refused their medication now. What are you doing about it? And we're hearing integrated care boards coming up with different stopgap solutions, which is better than nothing. The sort of NHS England have sort of responded to my email and said they are working on a solution that is going to be something that works in the interim. We'll have to wait and see what that is, but they are aware it's an issue. The Royal College of GPs is aware it's an issue. The British Medical Association are aware it's an issue, and it is widespread. It's whilst we'll get spikes of reporting in particular areas, it is widespread. And I know in Nottingham there was progress with, the Integrated Care Board had said something to GP practices about it. So there's patches of progress, but we're hoping for something that's going to work on a national level to, sort out this issue, because some GPs see it as, well, we're not paid to hold these shared care agreements and to prescribe. Others see it as part of the general GP contract. So we need to make sure GPs are all on the same page as this. And yes, it's quite surprising that looking at our data from people kindly filling in our tracking tool, it's quite surprising that a GP that was previously willing to prescribe is suddenly now deciding they don't feel competent to. But that there's an issue there of, well, why don't they feel competent? What can we be doing to address that issue?
Sorry, you cut out there for a sec.
Sensible way forward.
Oh, so I think you cut out a little bit, but I think we got the gist of sensible way forward, which probably is the best way. No, exactly. I mean, yeah, it's good to see there's some moves towards getting things fixed on a national level, and people are being really good at filling in that when they're being denied like HRT. And yeah, it's always annoying when you see the GPs say like, "Oh, it's not enough funding," or "Oh, I'm not competent," when they previously thought they were competent enough previously. But yeah, it's good. It's really impressive, and hopefully we can keep a eye on that in the future. I suppose. Was there anything else you wanted to bring up as well that would be if you want to let our audience know?
Good question. Well, there's been some good news. So people might remember that the previous government had some changes to the NHS constitution, and that there had been some trans hostile changes. The evidence around single sex wards and around trans staff and personal care, and around language use as well. When asked the previous, the Department for Health and Social Care had said there wasn't any particular evidence that the changes were needed, but that it was a priority of the government at the time. Well, the current government have announced that the proposed changes are being scrapped, and that the NHS consultation will be reviewed with a view to updating it, but it'll be after the NHS have published or after the Department for Health and Social Care have published the 10-year plan for the NHS. So that is, to their credit, quite logical. And whilst we don't know what's going to be in any future change to the NHS constitution, we do know that there was a lot of consultation. Respondents were outspoken about the attack on trans people within the previous proposed change, and so we're hoping that the current government will pay due regard to that, that any changes made changes that are needed, and that there's evidence that those changes are needed.
I've completely forgot about that, but that is really big relief, because now I've remembered it, and I'm trying to exclude trans women, trans people from the wards of, of their gender, and oh my gosh, that is brilliant. Yeah. Oh, that's some good news. Well, something for the trans joy.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing to look out for as well is the CEO of NHS England, Amanda, former leader of Ofsted, mixed up, but Amanda, the CEO of NHS England, has stepped down. There's currently an interim period, and there's going to be a new interim CEO of NHS England to take them through sort of the change associated with the 10-year plan. We don't know what that's going to mean in terms of policy making for trans people, but it's just one to know and one to be aware of. and of course, Transnational will be seeking opportunities to chat to any new, to help them to understand what the issues have been around trans healthcare and the need to come back to, or to move towards a sensible, expert-led approach, evidence-based approach, and moving to evidence-based policy making and not policy-based evidence making, which is what we've seen with the CAS review and is what we worried about with the puberty blocker trial as well.
No, definitely, and especially lovely study of it recently from King's College, which sounds like we've got to keep a very close eye on that one. But yeah, it's sort of the because Amanda left as the CEO, and she was there presiding over when things just continued to get worse and worse. So hopefully we can get someone who's not as well, we'll have to see how they do.
Yeah, exactly. We'll have to see how they do, and it's never going to be sort of attributing anything to one specific person in this case, but obviously CEO of NHS England that understands trans people's fears would be a good step in the right direction.
Great stuff. In that case, thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you for joining us. And check out Transnational and some of their cool stuff. We'll keep sharing about the See Us Hear Us campaign, and anything you send our way, we'll make sure to get people's eyes on.
Aidan, thanks ever so much.
It was lovely chatting with Che. It's always great to keep up to date with Transnational. Always fun to work with them.
Yeah, good conversation. Well done.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that are good and nice, it's Trans Joy time.
Woo! So this is to start off Trans Joy, we'll go for something that I actually missed from last week, which is a CBeebies webpage that highlights inspirational mothers for International Women's Day, listed both Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, explaining how they were drag mothers and protected their community, because motherhood comes in all shapes and sizes, and that's so beautiful. So beautiful.
That's lovely. It's
cool. Really cool. Fuck yeah.
So that's the only bit of trans joy we've got, isn't it?
Discord's been lovely. That whole thing about the pond of tadpoles. That's been adorable to watch recently. They've started making bubbles with how much they move.
I see.
They're really growing up.
Nice.
It's been one of my favourite bits. And someone's also had a little chick that was hatching. They've been hatching eggs and they've been keeping us up to date on that. I love the pets and cute animals section of this Discord. Another one of them members finally got their tea. So now they're waiting for their first injection day.
Oh, fuck yeah. Congrats.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Congrats. Yeah, and Natalie's also ordered her first DIY progesterone. So she's excited to see if that works for her.
Yeah.
Congratulations, everyone.
Yeah, well done. I've got a bit of trans joy, sort of.
Yeah?
It's trans musician joy. I've ordered myself a new cheap fretless bass, so I can do lots of lovely, lots of slidey noises. And as I say, it was only a cheap one, and I saw it, and I thought, okay, I can just about afford that with the money I had from a thing I do. I'm going to treat myself.
Yes.
So you look at the guitar board and you say, that's not a fret.
Thank you all for listening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cheers.
If you're interested in more of the rambling nonsense that we put out, you are of course quite welcome and encouraged to follow us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, we're on the Facebook, we're on Instagram, and you can find our website, which the enshittification of the internet hasn't reached yet, and that's the website that's shortly to undergo a bit of a
glow up.
Up, good phrase.
Yeah, a transition, if you will.
You. But yeah, all of the stuff that we put out, including lots of articles and things, that's all there. And if you feel like this is something that you want to support us in our work and our journalism, then you can drop us a few quid on Patreon, which is patreon.com/whatthetrans. Thank you all for listening, and we will speak to you again in a couple of weeks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This episode of What the Trans was produced and presented by Alyx, Ashleigh and Flint, and was written by Ashleigh, Alyx, Flint and Sammy. It was edited by Amber Roberts and Amber Devereaux, and our opening theme music was composed by Waretsara Yui Karlberg, and our episode thumbnail was done by Oboa Piers, and transcription performed by Sam Wyman, Rowan B, Rachel Aldred, Georgia Griffiths and Becky. And we would especially like to thank our producer-level patrons, who are Susan K. Quinn,
Ellie S,
Undead Narfa,
Bex the Mermaid,
Hazel Dust,
Brian Goss.
Can I get some echo on this one? Laura, Queen of Seagulls.
MX Bloody ice cream van, fuck off! MX Spectrum,
Becky Cheadle,
Jordan Starr,
Lindsay Cannon,
Lee Downs,
George Simmons,
B Squared,
Carly Silvers,
Smiley, friend of Candy from across the pond,
Sarah,
The Socialist Party of Great Britain 1904,
Eris,
Maestrom,
Tin Roof,
Lex Phoenix,
Joe has stopped using the Patreon shoutouts for therapy.
Oh, good on you, Joe. Sebastian sings soprano,
Andrea Brooks,
Stephen Blakemore,
Jack Edwards,
Now Art,
Flaming Daphne,
Needles and Threads,
Dr. McGee,
Katie Reynolds,
Jen,
Georgia Holden Burnett,
Root -1,
Grubbalicious,
Gray,
Bernice Roust,
Beth Anderson,
Ellen Meller,
Trowan,
Jay Hoskins,
Ashleigh,
Jane,
Satcab,
Roberto de Prunk,
Sarah,
Raw's Absolute,
Cena,
D,
Kiki T,
Sky Killane,
B,
Eric Woodman,
Jude,
Fergus Evans,
Monsieur Cruel,
Anubis a Jackal,
Break the System,
Brandon Craig,
Sean Phillips,
Lentil,
Heidi Reardon,
Clara Volume,
Samantha Raven,
Amelia,
Tabitha Joe Cox, aka Candy,
Murgatroyd,
Fiona McDonnell,
Ontologically Unjust,
Cindergoza,
Stella,
Rebecca Prentice,
Dan Oblivion,
Crazy Richard,
Florence Stanley,
L. Gray,
Helen _
Melody Nix,
John,
Fiona Punchard,
C.B. Bailey,
Ted Delphos,
Gordon Cameron,
Kai Lewin,
Patreon user,
Vic Parsons,
Vic Kelly,
Sabrina McVeigh,
Catherine,
Cassius Adair,
Kraken 12,
Melissa Brooks,
April Heller,
Alexandra Lilly,
Sophie Lewis,
Claire Scott,
Lauren O'Nions.
Bernard's Pink Jelly Bean.
Ariadne Pena, and Lanus.
Thank you to you all.
Thank you all for watching. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Toodaloo.
Bye.